Hey, good evening, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel Month Club for the month of November 2020, the year that cannot end soon enough. Our book this month is The Sacrifice of Darkness, a really fantastic science fiction novel. I like this a great deal. It's a great book. We're very lucky to be joined by a full group of people, like more than we've had in quite some time. We've got ROXANNE Gay, we've got Tracy Lynn Oliver, and we have got Rebecca Kirby. And I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight to talk about the book, to talk about art and how we make it. It started off as a short story that ran in Difficult Women. Here, I have a copy of this to hold up as well. Where did let's turn this into a comic come from?
So, actually, probably almost 3 years now. Good Lord. Almost 3 years ago now, Boom Studios approached me and asked me if I wanted to write a graphic novel or a comic series for them. And I thought about it, and I said, yes, I would love to. I had been a fan of their work because they had published a graphic series called Slam about roller derby. And my friend Pamela Ribbon wrote it, and it was just so well done and so charming and so engaging. And I knew they could do beautiful work. And as I was thinking about what kind of story to write, I knew I didn't have the bandwidth at the time to write an original story, so I thought I might adapt something of mine. And I have a few stories in the realm of magical realism, and that felt like it would lend itself really well to this interplay between image and text. And so I took it from there. And I also knew that I didn't have the time to adapt it by myself. And so Tracy happens to be my best friend and also my favorite writer. And so I knew she would be a great partner in this.
One of the things about the prose story is, I mean, we don't even know Claire's name in there. It's all, that's first person narrative? Is that right? Yes, thank you. So the structure of this book is entirely different. I read the comic first, and then I read the short story, and I was really surprised just how kind of it's the same story, but they're completely different in terms of how they're constructed, in terms of where the emotional beats are. All of the scenes that are in the prose are there, but they have different weights than they do in this. It's like a reimagining of the story.
Really, with the adaptation, we had the template that was provided by the short story, and we expanded it and really thought about where do we want to spend more of our narrative energy? Which parts of this story demand more telling? And so we wanted to explore how Hiram and Mara Hightower meet and fall in love. We wanted to pull apart Joshua and Claire's relationship more and the aftermath after Hiram flies his air machine into the sun. And so when you pull the story apart and when you expand it, you absolutely are going to have different emotional beats because there's more story there. And so that part was really one of trial and error and just trying to figure out, okay, where can this story go?
Not limitation, the boundaries of the page are what makes comics. And so in the scripting process, how much are you thinking about, here's the landscape that I have. I've got 6 to 8 panels kind of at most that I can communicate an idea. And in a lot of cases, they're probably, 3 to 5, really. How much is this bearing on your writing process? Or is it all just kind of getting fixed in post, as it were?
Well, in the beginning, after we wrote the story and we knew our page limitations, we kind of had to list out all the scenes we wanted in the book. And we had one column with pages and panels, and then it had to add up to 120 pages. So I had to go through and figure out, okay, well, how many pages and panels is a wedding scene? And okay, I'm guessing, okay, I read the scene and I'm guessing, okay, well, they're going to look at each other lustfully in this one, and the priest is going to be in this one, and then they're going to, and I just kind of had to, spitball it, put that down, make sure everything added up to 120, but then, turn that into boom. They're happy with it. But then once you start scripting, you're like, oh, well, let's see, maybe I can shave some off of that scene and add it into this scene because I need a big picture of the tree with them getting married on one page. I mean, that's going to be spectacular. And I just, okay, so it was kind of like a lot of, it wasn't a guideline, but, we played with that guideline because it's fluid as you're writing it or scripting it. What's going to be more important, or like what scene needs to have its own page or like its own bottom panel. So yeah, it was just a process.
Rebecca, when did you get in? At what point did you get involved? What existed?
So I came in when there was a completed comic script, and I was pretty much given like a small amount of the script, and they were like, "Hey, can you draw a couple pages from this? We want to see what this looks like." And I did, and they were like, "All right, you want to do the book?" And that's what I did. I had a finished script, and which pretty much offers like a panel by panel description of what's going on, and then my job is to kind of use what I know how to do to determine how to sort of piece it together so that it looks nice and is also readable as like illustration as language. Make sure that everybody can kind of tell what's going on. Don't have to rely too much on either words or pictures to have like a nice balance of the two. And I plugged through.
Yeah. So how much of that would you say was on the page already in terms of the storytelling, the flow of it, right? Versus you needing to make editorial decisions like, oh, this needs to it needs to go this way to be a comic.
Yeah. I think I stayed pretty much true to the script. There were small moments where I influenced the pacing of things, or hitting certain points more by like shifting things around or reducing the number of panels on a page or expanding those, or organizing what was happening on whatever page or spread in a way that sort of worked better in terms of like pure comic page format, which is like, that's my job and that's where I come in. So script more or less exactly as written, with minor changes to the organization of page and things like that.
Roxanne, we were talking about the differences in comics, particularly between the caption, the narrative caption, and dialogue in terms of moving the story forward. Did you have any thoughts on sort of the interplay between those things?
Yeah, the thing about captions is I try to use them judiciously, because you don't want to rely too heavily on this sort of external narration that reminds you that you are reading fiction, and I think it can pull the reader out of the story. But at the same time, sometimes you need to orient the reader in time and place, or you need to indicate that they've moved through time in some way. And so I think they're an incredibly important tool, but I think they have to be used well. And I think that sometimes people rely too heavily on them to do the work of storytelling that should be done either through dialogue or through description.
Yeah. So a lot of the narrative devices you have in prose don't necessarily work particularly well in comics. When I was reading the short story, there was I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was a line something like, "He shrugged into her arms," and I visually I construct that in my brain. I know what that means, but there's not a way to communicate that in comics, right? Because comics doesn't have enough move. You can do it, but you've got to spend 2 or 3 panels.
But it's tough. Yeah, right? Action's tough.
Yeah, action's tough. So where's the challenge there? What's the is there an easy path through? How do you conquer those kinds of problems?
When I figure it out, I'll let you know. I catch myself sometimes when I'm writing a comic scene where I'll say things like "she sighed" or she put her hand on her hips and walks across the room, and it's like I try to do that in like one line of information in a panel, and then I'm like, oh my god, I literally need to make sure that this is like in 3 panels so we can see the action happening. It's hard. It's really hard to move from what you can do in prose to what will work in comics.